Hi everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm trying out a few new products, which is always really fun, but a lot of these I actually got on my trip and I played with them a little bit while I was sitting behind the table at the convention, so it's fun to be able to sit down and give it a little bit more attention and focus. But today I am using my first time using actually a watercolor block, and that's where it's actually sealed on at least two edges already, so you don't have to tape it down or stretch it or anything. It's already prepared to be painted on, which is really nice. I've been kind of shying away from the steps that I've been taking so far to tape down my paper. I want to break free from that. I'm looking at different avenues to do that, and a watercolor block is one of the options. Of course, one of the hardest things about that is that because it's adhered to all the other paper, you can't use a light box to transfer your sketch over, which is the way that I prefer to use. So for this one, I actually just had to sketch right on top of it, and I may just end up doing that for this watercolor block, and I think that in the future for larger, more complex pieces I won't use a watercolor block at all. But this one is actually from Fluid, and the series is 100, and it's actually a cold press finish is what it says. I actually really liked the texture of this paper. It wasn't a really deep textured watercolor paper, which is what I prefer. I've been looking for something that's a little bit of a hybrid between a cold press and a hot press. So I was really happy with this one. I will definitely be looking into more of the loose leaf paper from Fluid in the future. If you guys have tried Fluid, I'd really like to hear your opinion on their other types of paper, or what you have thought about that paper. I always think it's interesting because different pieces, the way that I go about it, I run into different issues sometimes. So there may be some problems with this paper that I haven't really ran into yet because I haven't done a lot of layering or glazing. I haven't put a lot of paper on for this, or a lot of water on this paper for this particular illustration. So I think I'll definitely need a little bit more trying out of this paper, but I liked it a lot in this first attempt with it. And a quick thing on the microns that I was using at the beginning, I actually finally picked up the plastic nib, I think is what it's called. It just says PN on the end. And actually I was surprised at how much I liked it. There's enough give to it that I can get a little bit more dimension to the line work, and I'm also able to get really thin lines quickly and things that were a little bit more heavy with that same pen. It just felt a lot more natural and free-flowing, so I will definitely have to get some more of those, especially in some new colors. I do think that it might wear down relatively quickly, so that is the one test that I'll need to figure out, is if it can last long enough to make it through all the ink that I have, or at least close to it. But so far I really enjoyed it. I think that in a lot of ways I like it more so than the normal nib type. I think I do prefer still the typical ones when they're very thin for getting very precise details, but for 90% of inking, I really liked these types of pens. And I actually got all of this stuff, or most all of this stuff, from a local art shop in Denver, which was really fun because I live in a pretty rural area, so there's not a lot of localized art available for me, or art supplies. But when I was walking around, I found a display of the Ecoline liquid watercolors, and I was so excited because I love the look of it, and I've seen a lot of other artists use them, so I recognized it immediately, and I've never actually given it like a lot of thought of trying it myself, or else I would have ordered them online. But that was kind of fun. It was fun to run into this little like jewel of something that I think that I would have enjoyed trying. So I got a couple of the colors. I just picked a few that I thought I would like because I am one who prefers to get colors that I know I'll enjoy. So if I'm doing an illustration, I just have one standalone color, I want it to be something that I like. So I tend to steer more towards getting colors that are well suited for me, as opposed to simply sticking to primary colors and then always mixing. I like to get ones I like. So for this one, I actually got the color 361. That's light rose, and that's the pink color, obviously. I also have pastel blue, which is 580, and bronze green, which is 657. And it took a little bit of getting used to, simply because when you're using normal watercolors, of course different pigments are darker and some are lighter, but it's obscured a little bit because you are mixing it yourself. So when you're activating the watercolor, if you're using more water, it can make a darker color look lighter, and if you're using a lighter color and you pick up more pigment, it can look darker, of course. So it can kind of equalize the value to a certain degree and obscure that a little bit more. But for these, since they are at their maximum level of pigmentation, I have the pastel one, which is obviously very, very pale, and the green one is actually pretty dark. So if I could choose again, I probably would have chose a darker blue since I only have 3 colors. That way I'd have more variety. And of course you can dilute these so I can get a lighter one, but that's okay because I know for sure that I want to get some more of these inks. So having a few lighter varieties that are pre-mixed is definitely not a bad thing. But one thing to be aware of with these is that they're actually not light fast at all. I do plan on spraying every piece that I use these with a UV protectant spray, which should theoretically take care of that. It should make it so that it can be much more light fast. I actually plan on doing a test where I'm going to have the control where I'm just going to paint it and stick it up against the window, and then I'm going to have one where I paint it and then spray it and stick it up against the window, and then also have another sheet that I'm going to paint it and keep it somewhere dark, and then I can just test to see how much color variation is happening and fade over time. But hopefully this spray should minimize it quite a bit. I use it on pretty much all of my watercolors anyways just to be safe, but I think this one it's absolutely necessary unless you keep these in a little book. But yeah, it is something to be aware of that you have to be a lot more thoughtful with. And a lot of artists use these where they're planning on only making prints of them, and then the original is just that. It's just the original that eventually fades. For me, I really do like selling the originals, and I like having the originals, and I do not like the idea of working on a piece that I know is going to fade. I want it to stay and I want it to last. So yeah, fingers crossed that spray will be the answer to that one really big problem with these paints. But I loved these paints, actually. I loved how saturated they were, and I really enjoyed, although this is independent of the paints themselves, but I really enjoyed working with such a limited color palette where while I was working with these, I only used these 3 colors. It's kind of refreshing to get away from having a whole rainbow of an option to paring it down to just this. It allows me to think a little bit more thoughtfully about how I'm utilizing each color and what's the purpose in that. And it's just nice. It's enjoyable to be able to take some of the things that can cloud my creative process a little bit and take those away and just replace it with something pleasant and easy to comprehend. But yeah, one thing that I did notice is that it behaves a little bit differently than most of my watercolors. I have to use more paint and more pigment than I originally thought to spread it out evenly. If I use too little of the watercolor that's already mixed up, it starts to streak a little bit in the same way that markers do. It was really interesting because that was a texture that I hadn't seen in a long time since I've been really using my Copic markers. So it does take a little bit of finessing to get it to behave the way you want it to. I also found that it was a little bit more prone to staining the paper immediately, and that is something that some traditional watercolor pigments will do, and a lot of them don't. So for this one, if I left too strong of that pigment on the paper for like even just a second too long or half a second, it would stain that paper and I wouldn't be able to blend it out into a smooth edge. It just kept that brush stroke there. So I learned pretty quickly to not go in with too concentrated of a watercolor too quickly. And then finally I pulled out my new Cintiq metallic watercolor palette. I will of course have a link to this one as well, but I have been thinking about this one for a while and the price was great on Amazon, so I picked it up. And I used the green color and also the really sparkly, glittery gold one in this palette, which, by the way, that is my all-time favorite metallic gold. I have the whole gold palette, but this one is still my favorite. There's just so much glitter to it, so it has quite a bit more shine than any of the other ones I've used. But I made sure to balance this piece out with that gold. I drew a little circle using my tape as a stencil, and I was very thoughtful about that to make sure that it had similar width as her hair on the bottom so that it would weigh it down. And because it's shiny and it has a little bit more attention grabbing characteristics, it helps balance out the weight on the bottom. And I think that before it had that gold circle, it looked unfinished, and once it did, it felt a lot more balanced and also a lot more interesting. It was just a small detail that instantly gave this piece a lot more life and interest. And that is it for today. Like I mentioned, this little painting is available for purchase at my shop. There's a link right down at the top of the description down below. And I will be coating her in a UV protectant spray to help preserve the color for this one. But yeah, that's about it for today. I will be back on Wednesday with another video, and I will have a link to all of the new products that I tried out today down in the description as well. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.